The sky over Europe in 1943 was a place where courage and fear collided in every cloud, where every moment could be your last. The roar of engines, the crack of machine guns, the distant thud of explosions, it all blended into a constant symphony of war. And above it all, the pilots of the Luftwaffe thought they understood the air. They believed they knew what threats they could face. They had faced the Spitfires, the Mustangs, the light bombers. They thought they were ready, but no one, not a single German pilot, could have anticipated what they would see that day, the diving fury of the P-47 Thunderbolt. The P-47, a massive fighter, often underestimated by its enemies, looked almost comical to the untrained eye. It was bulky, heavy, and ungainly compared to the sleek German designs like the FW-190 and the Messerschmitt Bf-109. Many pilots dismissed it as slow, a lumbering giant that could be outmaneuvered with ease. But appearances, as the Luftwaffe would soon learn, were deceiving. Inside that metal shell, beneath its rugged armor, was something far deadlier than they ever imagined, a gun system so powerful, so relentless, it could shred an attacking squadron before they even had a chance to react. The story begins over the rolling fields of northern France, where the Allies were tightening their grip, preparing for the invasion that would change the course of the war. German pilots were patrolling the skies, confident in their training, their aircraft, and their instinctive understanding of air combat. They had been hunting for hours, chasing shadows, diving after formations of bombers, and testing their reflexes against the Allied planes they knew so well. But this was different. This was something new, something they hadn't been ready for. The P-47 appeared like a comet from the clouds. One moment, it was just a tiny speck on the horizon. The next, it was diving straight toward them, engines screaming, wings cutting through the air like a blade. Its pilot, shielded inside a cockpit designed to survive hits that would destroy lesser planes, aimed with cold precision. And then it happened. The first German fighter in the formation erupted in fire. Flames streaked across its fuselage as the P-47 unleashed a torrent of bullets. Its 8 .50 caliber machine guns, firing in unison, tore through the sky with a sound that German pilots would never forget. The attack was not just fast, it was calculated. The P-47 could dive at incredible speeds, faster than any German plane at the time, and pull up just as sharply, allowing it to dictate the engagement. It wasn't about dogfighting in the traditional sense, weaving and looping through the clouds. It was about power, surprise, and sheer destruction. The first reports from Luftwaffe pilots who survived the encounter spoke of a plane that seemed indestructible, a machine that turned the skies into a deadly trap for anyone who underestimated it. These pilots, many of whom had fought from the early days of the war, were seasoned and confident. Yet as they watched more P-47 seconds dive from above, tearing apart formations of Messerschmitts and FW-190 seconds alike, a cold realization set in. The Thunderbolt was not just a fighter, it was a predator, and in this moment, they were the prey. It had the speed to strike, the firepower to destroy, and the armor to survive counterattacks. Each dive left a trail of smoking wrecks behind. Each pull-up left pilots scrambling to avoid the inevitable. What made the P-47 truly terrifying wasn't just the guns or the speed. It was the combination of everything working together, the design, the armor, the weight, and the pilot's ability to push it to its limits. Unlike the lighter, more agile fighters, the Thunderbolt could absorb damage and keep coming. German pilots who tried to engage it often found themselves outgunned and outpaced, their tactics rendered nearly useless against a plane that turned conventional combat on its head. The first encounters were chaotic. German commanders tried to adapt, giving orders, shifting formations, hoping to find a way to counter this new threat. But every attempt seemed to fail. Each dive, each burst of gunfire, was another lesson in the brutal efficiency of the P-47. By the end of the day, reports flooded in losses that were higher than anyone expected, and a growing fear that these lumbering American planes were far more dangerous than anyone had predicted. But even as fear spread among the German squadrons, a grudging respect began to form. Pilots who had faced the P-47 and survived told stories of its resilience, of its uncanny ability to come back from hits that would have downed a lighter fighter. Some spoke of pilots who had engaged Thunderbolts for minutes, trading fire, and somehow walked away with their aircraft intact. Others whispered of near misses, where the dive itself seemed unstoppable, a force of nature that could not be denied. In the air, over the fields and towns of occupied France, a new kind of tension gripped every dogfight. Pilots who had once felt invincible now scanned the skies nervously, aware that the P-47 could appear at any moment. It wasn't just another plane, it was a game changer, a weapon that demanded new tactics, new strategies, and a new kind of respect. And for the Germans, it was a shocking revelation, a lesson in the limits of their confidence and the unpredictable nature of war. This was the beginning of a terrifying chapter in aerial combat, a moment when the skies themselves seemed to change overnight. The P-47, the Jug, as it was affectionately called by its pilots, had entered the fight not as a simple tool of war, but as a storm in human form, relentless, precise, and devastating. And as the German pilots watched it dive again and again, leaving wreckage in its wake, they understood, perhaps too late, that the rules of the game had changed forever. The morning skies over Europe were deceptively calm, with soft sunlight glinting off the wings of aircraft preparing for another day of patrol. But beneath that serene surface, tension crackled like static electricity. German pilots climbed into their cockpits, engines humming, confident in their ability to dominate the air. They had done it countless times before. They had faced the P-38 seconds, the Spitfires, even the early Mustangs. They believed they knew the rules of the fight. But the P-47 the P-47 was about to teach them just how fragile confidence could be. It started with a lone Thunderbolt, a massive plane, heavy and wide, approaching from high altitude. To an inexperienced eye, it seemed almost sluggish, its movements plodding compared to the lithe German fighters. But the moment it dove, the rules changed. In seconds, what had seemed slow became terrifyingly fast. The dive of a P-47 was something that could not be ignored, a vertical missile of metal, armor, and firepower. As it hurtled down, German pilots scrambled, pulling up, trying to evade a death that seemed inevitable. And then came the first burst. 8 50 caliber machine guns, spitting bullets with surgical precision, tore through the air. One Luftwaffe pilot, later recounting the event, described seeing his wingman explode in flames, a twisting figure falling from the sky. He tried to turn, to escape, but the P-47 wasn't done. Its pilot adjusted, tracking him like a predator honing in on prey. Another burst of fire, and his own plane shuddered from the near miss. In the span of seconds, formations were scattered, discipline shattered, and fear took root where confidence had once reigned. The German command tried to make sense of it. Reports flooded in describing the Jug in ways that seemed almost unbelievable. The P-47 wasn't just fast in a dive, it could absorb damage that would have destroyed almost any other fighter. Bullets would punch through its wings or fuselage, yet it remained stable, its pilot unshaken, ready to dive again. Encounters that should have been routine became deadly lessons in the limits of German tactics. The usual maneuvers looping, turning, trying to gain the altitude advantage often failed. The P-47 could dive faster, recover quicker, and unleash more firepower than any of them anticipated. In some cases, a single Thunderbolt would engage entire formations of German fighters. The numbers advantage seemed meaningless against a plane built for destruction. One pilot recalled the horror of seeing 3 of his comrades shredded in a matter of moments, their planes engulfed in smoke, their screams swallowed by the roar of the P-47's engines. The air itself seemed to tremble under the weight of the Thunderbolt's assault. And yet, despite the chaos, it never seemed reckless. Every movement was precise, calculated, almost mechanical in its perfection. What made these attacks so devastating was more than just speed and firepower. It was the way P-47 pilots exploited their plane's strengths. They knew that the German fighters relied on agility, on close-range dogfighting. The Thunderbolt's pilot, however, played a different game. He dived from high altitude, using gravity to accelerate beyond anything a Bf-109 or FW-190 could match. The dive itself became a weapon, a way to close distance and unleash a hail of bullets with lethal efficiency. Then, with equal skill, the P-47 could pull up, trading speed for altitude, ready to repeat the attack from another angle. It was relentless. It was horrifying. Accounts from survivors tell of German pilots being forced into desperate maneuvers just to avoid annihilation. They would twist, roll, and climb, only to see the Thunderbolt reappear, guns blazing, diving again with the inevitability of a falling stone. In some cases, pilots abandoned formations entirely, scattering in panic as the P-47 picked off one after another. The psychological impact was immense. Fear spread faster than the bullets themselves, infecting even the most experienced Luftwaffe pilots. And then there were the technical surprises. The P-47's armor made it almost impervious to frontal attacks, meaning head-on passes a tactic German pilots had perfected became far riskier. Its 8 guns, mounted in the wings, delivered firepower that could tear apart planes in seconds, leaving little chance for evasive action. Even when the German fighters tried to coordinate attacks, the Thunderbolt's sheer speed and resilience allowed it to dictate the terms of engagement. It was no longer a battle of skill alone, it was a war against an unstoppable force of engineering and precision. Yet the P-47 was not invincible. Its size and weight made it less nimble in tight dogfights. Pilots who attempted to trap it in turn fights sometimes succeeded. But the Germans quickly realized that to do so, they had to commit multiple planes, leaving themselves exposed to dive attacks or other Thunderbolts in the area. And more often than not, that gamble ended badly. Reports from both sides painted a clear picture. The P-47 could survive punishment, strike with devastating effect, and then escape before the enemy could recover. It rewrote the rulebook of aerial combat over Europe. One particularly harrowing account comes from a squadron that faced a pair of Thunderbolts over northern France. They intended to ambush them, using the classic tactic of attacking from above. But as the P-47 seconds spotted the incoming fighters, they went into a coordinated dive. Within moments, 2 German planes were destroyed, and the rest were forced into evasive action, unable to maintain formation. The squadron commander, a veteran with dozens of kills, later admitted that the sight of those dives, the sound of the guns, and the destruction raining down was unlike anything he had experienced. The P-47 didn't just fight, it dominated, shaping the air around it with lethal authority. The Allies had recognized the value of this plane early on. They knew the P-47's strengths lay not in agility but in endurance, firepower, and speed in a dive. Its rugged construction allowed pilots to push it harder, longer, and further than enemy aircraft. Its ability to carry bombs and rockets made it a dual threat, fighter and attacker, capable of shaping the battlefield in ways that few others could. For the German pilots facing it, however, these were lessons learned the hard way. Every encounter left scars, both on their planes and in their memories. By the end of these initial confrontations, a grim truth had settled over the Luftwaffe. The P-47 was not a plane to underestimate. It was a force that demanded respect, attention, and new tactics. Dogfighting alone was no longer enough. Survival required ingenuity, coordination, and sometimes sheer luck. The lessons learned over the skies of France would echo throughout the rest of the war, influencing how air combat was fought and forcing the Germans to reconsider everything they thought they knew. And so, as smoke trailed across the horizon and the echoes of gunfire faded into the distance, one fact became clear. The P-47 Thunderbolt was more than just another fighter. It was a revelation, a terror in the skies, and a machine that had forever changed the game of aerial warfare. German pilots, seasoned and confident, had seen it dive. They had felt its guns, and they had realized, with chilling clarity, that the skies were no longer theirs to dominate. The sky had become a theater of chaos. Smoke curled from burning planes, trails of fire marked the path of fallen pilots, and the roar of engines cut through the silence of dawn like a knife. For the German pilots, the once familiar air above Europe had turned into a gauntlet, a place where every second carried the weight of life and death. And at the center of this storm was the P-47 Thunderbolt, diving and climbing with lethal precision, rewriting the rules of combat with every pass. The most intense engagements often began at dizzying altitudes. German pilots, seeking the advantage, would climb above the clouds, scanning for enemy formations below. They had faced many fighters before, relying on their agility, speed, and cunning. But when a Thunderbolt appeared, the dynamics shifted instantly. It was not just another plane to chase or evade. It was a predator from the heavens, and the first sign of its presence was often the last thing a pilot would see clearly. One squadron, flying over the hedgerows of northern France, experienced this firsthand. The Luftwaffe formation spotted what they thought was a solitary P-47. Confident, they moved to engage, expecting an easy target. The Thunderbolt's pilot, however, had other plans. Without hesitation, he kicked the nose down, entering a dive that seemed impossibly fast. German planes scrambled, peeling off in panic, but the lead pilot didn't make it. In seconds, fire erupted across his fuselage, and he spiraled out of control, smoke trailing behind him like a death banner. Witnessing this, the other German pilots' confidence crumbled. Their movements became frantic, uncoordinated, and desperate. The P-47's 8 guns fired in unrelenting bursts, cutting through formations with horrifying efficiency. By the time the dive ended and the Thunderbolt pulled up, several German fighters were already gone. Those who survived carried a newfound caution, a fear that lingered with every twitch of the controls. This was no ordinary plane. It was a juggernaut of destruction, and it had no intention of showing mercy. What made the Thunderbolt even more terrifying was its resilience. It could take hits that would have downed almost any other fighter and keep going. A German pilot who managed to score hits often found that the P-47 shrugged them off, its engine roaring, its pilot unshaken. Every dive and burst of fire reinforced a simple truth. The Thunderbolt dictated the engagement, choosing when to strike and when to vanish back into the clouds. It was the hunter, and German fighters were prey caught in its shadow. In these battles, experience often proved insufficient. Veteran pilots who had faced Spitfires, Mustangs, and FW-192s knew every trick, every maneuver. But the Thunderbolt challenged them in ways they had never imagined. Turns and rolls that had saved lives before now left them exposed, and the sheer volume of firepower meant mistakes were punished instantly. Some pilots described the sound of the P-47's guns as a continuous roar, a mechanical scream that drowned out thought, leaving only reflex and fear. Even when German formations attempted coordinated attacks, the P-47's combination of speed, armor, and firepower allowed it to survive and strike again. One report tells of a formation of 6 fighters attempting to trap a single Thunderbolt. They surrounded it, attacking from multiple angles, confident that their numbers would prevail. But the Thunderbolt dived, a vertical spear of metal and bullets, taking out 2 planes before climbing back above the clouds. By the time the remaining fighters regrouped, their advantage had vanished. The P-47 had not just survived, it had dominated. The psychological impact on Luftwaffe pilots cannot be overstated. They were trained, skilled, and confident, yet the Thunderbolt introduced a new kind of terror into the skies. Pilots who once attacked with precision now hesitated, doubted themselves, and second-guessed every maneuver. Fear became a weapon almost as potent as the machine guns themselves. Each encounter left lasting impressions, shaping their tactics and altering the very way they approached combat. The Allies, meanwhile, understood the significance of the Thunderbolt. Its design was intentional, rugged, powerful, and capable of taking the fight anywhere. Pilots were trained to exploit its dive speed, its heavy armor, and the sheer destructive capacity of its guns. Ground attacks, strafing runs, and bomber escorts all benefited from the P-47's presence, turning it into one of the most versatile and feared aircraft of the war. And when German pilots faced it, the results were catastrophic, as history would later record. Over time, Luftwaffe commanders tried to adapt, changing formations, instructing pilots to avoid high-altitude engagements, and even attempting ambushes. But the Thunderbolt had already proven its dominance. Every lesson learned came at a cost: planes lost, lives ended, and morale shaken. It wasn't just a battle of machines. It was a battle of wits, nerves, and the terrifying reality of modern aerial combat. By the end of the encounters over northern France, one thing was clear. The P-47 Thunderbolt had changed the game. German pilots who had once patrolled the skies with confidence now approached each engagement with caution. The Jug was no longer merely a plane. It was a symbol of unstoppable force, a lesson in the limits of assumption, and a machine that demanded respect through destruction. As smoke cleared over the battlefields and the echoes of gunfire faded into memory, the Thunderbolt continued its mission. It carried bombs, it protected bombers, and it strafed enemy positions, all while teaching the Luftwaffe the harshest lesson of all. Underestimate a machine, and it can and will destroy you. German pilots had watched it dive, had felt its guns, and had lived to tell the tale. For some, survival was luck. For others, it was skill, but for all, the lesson was unforgettable. The P-47 Thunderbolt, bulky, rugged, and underestimated, had proven that power could triumph over elegance, that resilience could redefine tactics, and that in the unforgiving skies of World War II, only those who adapted could survive. And in that high-stakes theater of wings and fire, it earned a reputation that would echo for decades, a relentless, fearsome force that reshaped the very art of aerial warfare.